I hope you had a good lunch and a good break, and now we are back. And it's my privilege now to introduce our next speaker, Christy Klimas from the Department of Environmental Science and Studies, who is also the chair of the Focal Point Seminar Committee. So Christy, I'll let you take it away.
Great. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce DePaul's own Kelly Tzumas from the School of Public Service in LAS. She has almost 20 years experience teaching at DePaul in public policy studies and environmental management. She brings extensive private sector experience from the Department of Energy, her time as a congressional fellow, and a distinguished chair in environmental science or environmental studies for the Fulbright. Today, she uses some of these interdisciplinary experiences to publish and teach environmental courses using GLE partners, which span 4 continents and 8 partners. In fact, she's been an inspiration to me in terms of what you can do with virtual learning. And she's highly recommended by John Mario as one of the sort of best mentors in terms of cold calling potential partners and just being persistent and following up. And, you know, you'll hear some of her excellent work with some of her excellent work with the Navajo Nation in this talk today. She's received numerous well-merited teaching and advising awards at DePaul and elsewhere, and she's actively engaged in research that she publishes with her DePaul students and GLE partners on environmental issues. Her most recent book is from this year, Toxic Chemical in America, Controversies in Human and Environmental Health. And part of the reason that we have her here is specifically due to her advocacy and work as an ally in relation to the disability community at DePaul. So we're really excited to see how we can better support those learners in DePaul and within the Focal Point. She's also the co-founder of the new employee resource group, A4, the Faculty Learning Committee on Teaching the Disabled Learner, and a co-PI on an AGIF for outreach to the disabled learner. So even though I could go on and she gave me even more material, it would take the entire time. So I really want to turn it over to Kelly.
Oh, Christy, thank you very much for that introduction. And it is my pleasure to be here today. I was invited to speak on ableism. And so I am more than happy to do that, as well as to share some of the research that we've done both nationally on the disabled learner and on the DePaul disabled learner. So this is a wonderful event to get that information out. So today, I'm going to talk about ableism. Particularly, I'm going to talk about the importance of us being flexible, accessible, and taking a universal design approach so that we don't get stuck as instructors in that kind of one-size-fits-all approach of ableism in our teaching. And 2 of the questions I want to keep on the forefront in your mind, both today during this talk, as well as when you're designing your courses. And these are mindful questions, and these are 2 very important questions. How can we implement universal design and accessibility approaches to achieving our learning outcomes for all students? And then a critical self-awareness look inward to all of us as instructors, a challenge to all of us. How do we get stuck? How do we get stuck in the processes as instructors versus trying to remain nimble in our pedagogy to reach all of our learners and not leave anyone behind? And these questions really dovetail nicely with the previous presentation by Alex Joppi, because we've worked really hard at trying to make our courses accessible for all. Now, I'm going to model some of the behavior in this, and I'm going to show some tools. So right now, if everybody could try to turn on, I do have mine turned on, your CC captioning, you can experience that as an audience member. I have mine on already, and it's being recorded and will be part of that. The other thing that we do in the disabled community is when we have presentations like this, and instructors can also benefit from this technique, you introduce yourself orally, but in a visual manner. So I'm going to do that right now as a model. Hi, my name is Dr. Kelly Tzumas. I'm in the LNS College, the School of Public Service. I am a professor at DePaul. I have gray hair, white skin, brown eyes, glasses, and I'm sitting down with an ear set on. Okay. All right, that's a common technique that we use for the disabled community. So first today in our agenda, we're going to talk about the profile of the learner. That's really important, both nationally and at DePaul. I'm going to turn to tools, but I am not a tools expert. I am a user and a beneficiary of tools. And so I'm going to very quickly go over the free tools that are available for all instructors at DePaul that we can be using, that are easily accessible to all of us. Then I'm going to talk about the role of learning outcomes, which is really important because this is what drives our assignments. Assignments are made towards learning outcomes, and there's some adjustments in nimbleness that we can do here for the disabled learner. And then I'm going to talk about COVID, both the negatives and the positives. Sometimes the positives we overlook, particularly for the community that relies heavily on technology for learning. And then I'm going to conclude with a culture change or a mindset that's needed for all of our students as we move through this chaotic time in history for higher ed. Okay, so let's start with the profile of the learner. And I'm going to show several visuals. All of these visuals do have alt text, so I will be asking that the PowerPoint slides be posted as well as the recording because they have visual descriptions in the alt text for all students. So let's begin with language. Language is very important, and we all know this. The power of language for the disability identity is critical. Now, there's two schools of thoughts, and I want to get this out on the table right at the beginning. I was trained in the school of thought, which is still around, person first language, meaning you talk about the learner first, and then you talk about the disability. My students at DePaul have corrected me and add to that discussion ferociously. In fact, disabled learner. And in fact, if you look at the social media on this college learner, you can see t-shirts, as you see here on the right, posters, hashtags about putting the disability first. They do not want it to be invisible, but it also isn't the only definition of who they are. So I'm going to use both in this presentation because both right now are indeed accepted. Instead of worried about where does the word disability show up in our sentence, what we need to be thinking about is the language of ableism and the visuals of ableism that we use as an implicit bias that we're not even always aware of. Historically, we have thought about disability in the US and worldwide as something that needs to be solved or something that needs to be fixed. And this is not the case. In fact, we're finding more and more students coming to DePaul from the elementary and middle school and high school because they're being prepared better. We have stronger high school staff that are preparing our students with IEP and 504 plans. And so we're starting to see more students come. And at the same time, more students recognize that they need this help than even before they came here. And so students with disabilities, and I think we all know this, are increasing in population in our post-secondary institutions and in our classrooms. I think we've all seen that. There are really strong components of the student population, particularly college students, that have moved disability rights into the forefront. And so even the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has 10 principles of disability rights I would encourage you to take a look at. But it's our college students and our high school students that have really turned disability rights into a movement now for many years. And the phrase that they use and continue to use is nothing about us without us. So if you ever get confused on what is the best way to teach this learner, is you can ask them for what they need to learn. And that's what they would prefer us to do. Instead of making assumptions about what we think they need, you can certainly ask them on what they would. These are pictures in a very common phrase used by disabled students who have mobility challenges called cutouts to nowhere. And so what you can see on here is very good intentions with universal design, very bad implementation with universal access. And so these walkways intended to help students and the public are actually barriers because they lead to nowhere. There's no accessible sidewalks. And so getting the disabled person perhaps across is not sufficient. Some more designs that are not accessible. You could see this looks like a ski slope over here on the right side as an accessible design for somebody with mobility. This is real. The left one is even more disconcerting. This I found as a speaker who was coming to a smart city panel, so about our urban design, and he was to speak on accessibility, could not get to the podium. So the complete, kind of thread through what somebody with disability needs for accessibility was not completely thought through. All right, some more pictures of what we can see here. Mobility challenges where there's a median in the middle of the crosswalk, or even better, barriers on the other side, or a step up into the mobility lift, or a door opening that it impacts the ramp for the stairs. So these are common. Our students experience these. Here's on the left, a disabled locker in a locker room, which a disabled person cannot get into, okay? And so our students really have reported 4 biggest problems with inaccessibility on campus, and that's automatic doors, finding accessible housing, limited parking, and inaccessible bathrooms. Now, the profile nationally of this learner comes from the National Center of Educational Statistics, and these are recent statistics. And so our pre-college providers in public schools especially are doing a wonderful job at really trying to move these students along in their educational journey to colleges. And so what we're seeing is the pre-college public school learners who received assistance, 7.3 million. That's 14% of all the public school students. The most common category that was reported and is growing is learning disabilities. And that's a broad category. And basically from 2009 to 2020, these learners increased from 6.5 million to 7.3 million. So this population is indeed growing. The Center for Educational Statistics also reports that about 44% of the high school graduates with disabilities immediately enroll in a 4-year college. About half of that go to community colleges, to the 2-year schools. And the undergraduate ages are a little bit different. And so I want to point these out. From 18 to 23, about 18% of our disabled learners represent this category. 24 to 29 years old is about 22%, and greater or equal to 30 is about 23%. So the profile looks a little bit different, what you will see in your first year program for the disabled student in terms of age. Now, our learners are intersexual and they're diverse. The disabled learner is not monolithic, and you'll hear me repeat this. So for gender, the National Center for Education Statistics reports this year that undergraduate females and males that are disabled, it's about 19 to 20% are coming into our colleges across the US. And for graduate school, and this number is increasing, we're seeing 10% for males, 13% for females who are disabled. So we coming in from this community. Ethnically and race-wise, Asian, Black, Hispanic represent respectively 15, 17, and 18% of this population. White, 21%, and the numbers go up pretty quickly here with 2 or more races, and Pacific Islanders and American Indian, Alaskan Natives often will be from our disabled community. Now, something near to my heart. I am a co-PI with Kent Kloss over in the Business College. He's in MIS Accounting School, and we have a 3-year AGIF, that's Academic Growth and Innovation Fund, to reach out to students with disabilities. And we are now in about year 2.5 or so of that. And now I'm going to turn to the specifics of the disabled learner here at DePaul, and you can compare that back to the national sample. The CSD learner, and this is, we have today 1,275 disabled learners. And let me clarify that, at DePaul, enrolled and connected to the CSD. That number changes term to term, and that number is low. That we expect that to be an underestimate, because it is only those students who have the ability to get healthcare forms and medical forms and the desire to become uncloaked at the university level. Most disabled learners at DePaul are not transfer students. In fact, the vast majority you can see here are students that come to us for the first time. And we ask students that are affiliated with our CSD at DePaul, how did you hear about the CSD? Because remember, that's one of the challenges that we have in this community. And most learners, I think the results here are also pretty clear. Most learners attended a DePaul orientation, or they went to the DePaul website. And so that's really important, because that's two measures of how our students are hearing about getting accommodations in your classes. And so other routes, which I think also are important, are professors and academic advisors at DePaul are letting students know about our resources on campus. High school counselors and staff and doctors and therapists, family and peers. And there is a brochure that goes out to our learners. And so they also cited that as having some effect on knowing about the CSD here at DePaul. So where are our students coming from? They are coming from the same place most of our other students are coming from. They're coming from regionals, city, suburban. Most of our students who are disabled come east of the Mississippi. They're coming from east of the Mississippi, with some outlying plains and Southwest states. And our students, the majority that are entering with disabilities, are coming as 18-year-olds. And you can see it goes all the way out to 55-year-olds. And so this is a very interesting socio-demographic that I think we all need to be aware of. All right, I'm going to turn to tools, but please do not think that this is an expert, comprehensive tool presentation, but there are things on here I think that can help. And these are all free and available at DePaul, and I use them readily. So the traditional tools, like I mentioned, alt text. So your PowerPoint slides, if you right click on the visuals, the pictures that you put in there, and hopefully they're not all text-based, that's where the alt text menu will come up in PowerPoint and in the other software. And this is where you put in a visual description of what in words, in maybe 2 sentences, 3 sentences of what your slide has on it for the visual. Adobe Acrobat, I actually discovered this one. I had a disabled student, and I use a lot of primary sources, government documents, and they're older. And so I convert all of my documents under Adobe Acrobat, which is free. It's under review, and then the scan OCR into recognizable text. And my non-disabled students are really happy when I do this as well. So I would encourage everyone to look to our Adobe Acrobat software. Recordings are really important, and you will see captions at the bottom. Turning on captions both for your recordings as well as your Zoom synchronous is critical for the disabled student, and they don't like to have to remind you to do that, and because it calls them out, and they would prefer that you would just immediately do that for all of your lectures and recordings. And then there's this wonderful thing besides captions, and when you do your captions, those of you who have done them will notice that the voice to text recognition is still somewhat rudimentary. So words that you've never said get put in there. So it's really important that you edit your captions, okay, when using them. And accessibility checks. This is one of the strongest tools we have right now. Many of the programs, including PowerPoint, and I've put a picture here of it, have a check accessibility. This will check your fonts, your errors, your colors, everything. It will give you tips. And I've done that with this presentation. And so these colors are actually disability supportive in terms of the PowerPoint. All right, now some more options, like those were just traditional options, but I'm a very innovative teacher. And so I do a variety of things in my focal point course. One of the things I do is global game simulations with a variety of global partners. In fact, I had one this morning right before this presentation. And the early release of scripts, because we play roles globally with many countries from Iran. We had Iran, several students from Iran, Belgium, Chile, Colombia, France, Spain, Italy, the Navajo Nation, Mexico, Brazil in my courses just this term playing these games. And so the early release of materials. So if you're going to do something like I do debates as well, early release of any roles of any materials is critical for the disabled learner, and being available to answer perhaps additional questions that both your non-disabled learner and learner need. And we had a specific case I want to relay this term in one of my environmental classes. I had a disabled student who wanted to lead the team in the game. And if you know anything about game simulations that take place synchronously, the literature is very clear that disabled students can't play games. They can't possibly engage at the level of that's required of a game. Well, I've disproved that. We had this term, and that's published literature, which we're going to defunct. I had in this a leader, a student who wanted to be a leader and called herself out. And she was very prepared. And the morning, we play these early in the morning because of the time zone on Fridays and Saturdays. She got nervous. And so she started texting me. And so I was available. And I said, hop into team 1, you're team 2. And that observation, disabled students love to have those kinds of ability to observe expectations before they actually perhaps lead a team in a class. And so she was enormously successful with Brazil on our team. And so that's another tool that I want to just, it's about being flexible and creative. Virtual reality, I do virtual reality lectures and I share them with other professors who are using them. And this requires obviously visual and hearing. And so I work with the CSD in those virtual reality lectures, and they assign someone from the CSD to actually write scripts and to describe what is happening inside of the goggles. And so the disabled students have loved, instead of eliminating that assignment, which I offered, they wanted to still participate in it. And so we built those accommodations around that participation. And then websites. What you may not know is the research on websites that's coming out of England on disabled students is you've got 2 clicks. You've got 2 clicks before you lose a variety of our disabled students. And so if you're using websites, just keep that in mind for our student. All right, now here's a variety of Zoom tips, and this is recent information. This is a report that was actually issued by Disability In, which is a very active nonprofit organization here in Chicago and in the US. And these are the best methods for doing Zoom meetings. And so some of the things are obvious, like, you know, if we're going to have flex rooms, we need to have large monitors and screens in those classrooms. Always be available by phone and email. Ask participants ahead of time what accommodations are needed for their performance and their digestion of the materials. Always post your slide deck as well as your recording in D2L. If you can get that slide deck up there ahead, that's really important, because then the learner can take that information into their own screen readers and put it and digitally download it into their own devices. Now, being nimble isn't just technology. Okay, it also is making certain adjustments and being creative and thinking out of the box for this student. So to be inclusive, for instance, you might, like I modeled earlier, have each student describe who they are and what they are, and of course mention their name on a Zoom meeting so that the participation can be fully inclusive. It's really important too to remind students not to interrupt, because this becomes really confused for the disabled learner who's relying on captions or perhaps a sign interpreter. It's always important to read out loud what's in the chat, which we'll model at the end of this presentation. Polls, just so you know, and breakout rooms are still difficult for the disabled learner, and Zoom, it does not have auto captioning in those breakout rooms or for polls. And so just keep that in mind, that you might have to orally get that into the record, into the closed captioning, by describing what happened in those breakout rooms when you return, as well as in the chat functions. And again, please edit your captions, because the voice to text is still really hard. Now, universal design and accessibility shouldn't be overwhelming. And in fact, this is a crib sheet from England that is being used in the community. You don't have to know all of this, and it should not overwhelm you. We have experts that actually get certificates and degrees, and we've had a panel here at DePaul that the students put on, where they brought in experts from the outside to talk about universal design and accessibility in the digital space. And so these are just some ideas, and I use this, and certainly I will be giving my slide deck to Jen, and you can certainly get a copy of this, or I can even send you the URL for it. All right, the other thing that we've done, which was really fascinating this year, is we had a faculty learning community from 2020 to 2021 on the best practices for teaching the disabled learner. And one of the things, we were one of 3 faculty learning committees last year. One of the things we did was we all took the Harvard University implicit bias test, and disability is on there. And it's really, it's a great kind of screening and awareness. I put the URL here. It's not perfect, but it is a starting point for our implicit bias checks on disability. Now, back to our questions. Let's see if we've answered some of these, and if not, we will directly answer them. So the answer to these questions is being creative and creating options that are flexible in how you achieve your learning outcome. You have to think differently. So one assignment alone, just as Alex mentioned, is not the only way to achieve your learning outcome. There are many types of assignments that can achieve your learning outcome. And so I would encourage you to think about what other assignments you could build in achieving your learning outcome, and giving those options to the students. Okay. And if we think differently, we're going to become more inclusive in who gets to be part of the dialogue. All right. I want to talk now about opportunities from COVID, which we don't usually think about. The negatives to this community were profound. During the pandemic, there was a disproportionate impact to students with disabilities, both physical learning, neurodiverse students, and cognitive abilities. And so these students actually experienced higher levels of financial hardship, including unexpected increases in spending for technology, in living expenses, loss or reduction of income from family members, personal wages from off-campus employment, etc. And they were more likely to experience food and housing insecurity. Higher rates also were seen in the disabled college student, higher rates of massive depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder during the pandemic. But there were some positives too, and we tend to overlook the positives. Many disabled students preferred the shift to online courses. The use of recordings, modalities during the pandemic both disabled employees as well as disabled students really benefited from. It introduced all students and all faculty to a level playing field of the problems and challenges with technology as well as their benefits. Office hours and faculty accessibility was actually enhanced for this student. They did not have to worry about getting to geospatial office hours. Also, the learners from this community are concerned about modalities becoming less accommodating as we move out of the pandemic. Many students, is reported, welcome the return to in-person learning, but the change has revived some pre-pandemic difficulties for the disabled learner and created some new ones. Here is from November 3rd, 2021, Washington Post, some testimonies from students from a variety of universities about feeling left behind as we returned to campus. Some students lamented the reduction of online instruction, which allowed them to read closed captioning in lectures real time, and turned their cameras off when they needed. Not that they're disengaging, but that some of the visuals and some of the auditory and different things happening with the disabled student means they do have to take breaks and turn off that video. And most of all, this student got to review those recordings and review those lectures and materials at their own pace at home. Losing that flexibility brought a lot of physical and mental distress that we're still seeing today and feelings of being forgotten. One student here quoted in this article, and we're going to look at several over the next 2 slides, says, "I have to work 10 times as hard than my classmates just to be able to succeed, and yet I'm not supported." Other students in this article also commented on what's the most painful and heartbreaking about the pandemic is seeing that the world at a flip of a dime was able to restructure itself when it came to able-bodied folks needing those accommodations. And this student feels so much pressure that she has to choose between life and the pursuit of her degree because she needs the online and accommodations for learning. Other students said, "I enjoy Zoom learning because I felt like I could actually understand and take the social cues better. I did not need to ask other people to join groups because my professor automated that. I could easily raise my hand digitally and feel less anxious than if I was attending a class." Other students in this article talked about clear face masks and the importance of using clear face masks that was overlooked by week 2 and week 3, and the reluctance of actually having to call that out every single class period to both her instructor and the students because it stigmatized this disabled students. And Zandy Wong does report falling behind because she actually sat back and did not speak up about those clear face masks. Students say the pandemic showed me that environments can be fully accessible in a virtual world or a hybrid environment with little cost to the university. All right, now let's move to talking about culture change and the mindset needed for our students if indeed our goal is full inclusivity and accessibility. There's a couple of really good books. The one that I tend to favor of these 3 right now is Dalmage's book on academic ableism. I actually was so fortunate to attend a live panel with him in October during Disability Employment Awareness Month. Dalmage clearly says, if you get a chance to read his book, these are all 3 very good books, but if you get a chance to read his book, he talks about how disability studies has emerged on college campuses as a academic discipline. Disability justice and rights and awareness that our current generation has embraced. Our students are fully embraced in disability as part of the DEI movement. It is considered a political and cultural identity, not simply a medical condition. Like other parts of the society, disabled people, including our students, are not monolithic. They are not one-dimensional. They are intersectional, as the data showed earlier. And according to Dalmage, disability studies has emerged from an ableist architecture that remains powerful in higher education. Higher education implicitly assumes able-bodiedness and able-mindedness. And according to Dalmage, few cultural institutions do an outstanding job or a more comprehensive implicit approach of promoting ableism. There is no more ableist location, according to this author, than the university. So language, image, these all shape our beliefs, our values, we know that, our institutions, and even our bodies and the urban environment. Now, multimodality is critical for this learner who often gets overlooked. And you can see as early before the pandemic in 2018, in one of our professional sources, Inside Education, they declare online education as a disability right, even before the pandemic, to include all learners. Often, delegating disability to HR for employees or to the CSD, the Center for Student Disabilities, as it's called at DePaul, can be very limiting in higher education. Metrics of persistence, graduation rates, degree completion rates, those are some metrics, not of the CSD. They are our metrics as faculty and administrators of programs. And we should all be concerned about those metrics in meeting all of our students for the vitality of our university. It is not just the responsibility of the CSD. And so the Vicentian approach on how we treat each other is not an HR function. It is not a CSD function. And so I think it's something that we need to remember, because it's real easy to kind of push this kind of role that we have as faculty on top of the CSD. And we are definitely partners and the leaders in the classroom on how we accommodate our students. Now, some more on language that I want to kind of demystify, because I think that can help. Saying things like, you don't look like you need a disability, or do you really need more time on this test because it doesn't seem like you do? Or how about this one? The building isn't accessible. It's historical. So it's old. So it is not, it does not have ramps, and it does not have working elevators. And also the one that I hear probably the most innocently is, without people realizing how it's coming across to a disabled person or student, is we all become part of the disabled community as we age, don't we? So I will get there. It's just a problem of time. Okay, that's pretty invalidating to someone who's struggling with disabilities today. Now, self-identity for this learner is critical. The research shows, in fact, research done here at DePaul in the 1980s to help create the PLUS program and the CSD from our College of Education at DePaul, clearly showed that self-identity and the interactions between staff and faculty outside of the classroom had direct impact on retention and persistence. And so those informal conversations that you have outside of your classroom are really important to this learner. And self-identity. So about 20% of adult learners have, as we saw, one disability. Unfortunately, faculty with disabilities in higher education only represent about 4%. And so underreporting is very much a problem for students, faculty, and staff. Now, my area, as you heard in the introduction, is on the environment. And my scholarship is dealing with environmental movements, environmental policy. And I am moving now into a literature that intersects and calls out some of the exclusionary aspects of some of these environmental movements over time. And so these are two really good books that really outline some of the problems with conservationism, with the wilderness movement early on, the modern environmental movement of the 1960s, sustainability of today, environmental justice and racism, climate and energy justice. There are some really important things regarding exclusion in these different environmental movements. And they boil down to an issue, a fundamental issue of othering. So placing people as others rather than as belonging and having real contributions is something I hope, can avoid here at DePaul. Now, much like Abraham Kendi's work on how to be an anti-racist, ableism is everywhere. It does not invalidate our research, it doesn't, or our teaching, but we are all responsible for looking for it, recognizing our roles, and seeking change, and keeping in mind that universal design is not always universal access. Allies are critical, just as they are with any of our societal members. They are particularly critical for the disabled learner. Acknowledging and respecting experiences and abilities, learning about different disability types, leveraging your influence to promote accessibility and inclusion, and yielding the floor to people with disabilities to help identify and eliminate these barriers. Ableist allies can really help call out issues of exclusion for both colleagues and students. And without calling it out, we disguise ableism to ourselves and to our students. Please allow me to remind all of us, we recently had a president of the US mimic a disabled journalist at a very large rally where people applauded. Hundreds of people applauded. Others were humored by it, others ignored it. And when the president's reasoning was he did not do that, even though he was on recording, or it was just a joke, this took away from the disabled community. Disabled students and faculty experience hundreds of microaggressions in our society before they enter our class. And so they make extraordinary efforts in pre-planning to attend and to participate. The energy level is something we are not aware of because we are not accustomed to what we take for granted. It is called, there's a name for it even, crip time. I leave you with this last example. At our last meeting with President Esteban for the employee resource group called A4, it's our first one for employees at DePaul that have disabilities. Before the meeting, he told me about an encounter that he had with two students while he was walking around campus. And these two students who had disabilities came up to him and said, please, we do not want to return to the old pedagogies before the pandemic. We really saw ability to participate more because we had recordings that we could look at home, because we had PowerPoints with alt text, and we don't want to at all return and lose those particular enhancements that occurred during the pandemic. Now, I proposed ableism as a topic for our theme this year in Focal Point, and I am a co-PI for, as I mentioned, the AGIF outreach to students with disabilities. We will not be successful in that outreach if we don't all accept a role of a sentient community to keep our minds open, our hearts open, and be nimble in your pedagogy for all students. We're not going to be perfect in the transition to universal accessibility. It is ongoing right now. We're getting more technology, we're getting more techniques, but I do believe it begins with the first year program, because it is here where we start losing our disabled students. It is in the first couple of terms during their freshman year. And I believe that this is an important contribution that we can make as we recruit more of these students and we see more of these students show up in our courses. This is when they lose persistence. So we must try to seek multiple modalities, which include both online teaching and online techniques that I've talked about in this presentation for both disabled and able-bodied students. I represent a faculty member who's been here for almost 20 years, and I was trained by DePaul in GLE and DOTS while I was able-bodied. My transition to remote learning, there was no transition during it. In fact, it was smooth, and I kept all of my GLE partners on board, and so we had wonderful conversations in Focal Point regarding what was going on with the pandemic. I helped faculty who had not had a chance to get through DOTS, particularly our adjunct faculty and term lecturers, to quickly transition. My disabled students benefited, as well as my non-disabled students, regarding the online techniques that I use. I play global games on Friday mornings and Saturday mornings, and I have students lining up to play more of them. They want to play more roles, and we go from about 8 a.m. to 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Fridays and Saturdays. We had 5 games alone in this term, and I have 3 in the focal point, as well as a debate on nuclear waste. So my students participate globally. They participate online. I am asynchronous with points of dates that I put into the registration where we actually connect. There are no geospatial issues and disability barriers to participating in my courses. My focal point on nuclear waste has multiple countries and has been the center of 2 conferences. One is the International Virtual Exchange Conference that occurred this October, and a second conference. We brought that focal point course online, kind of the research that I have going on that focal point from an IRB into the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And I did that with my global partners and a student from SPS. And so we got invited back actually to talk more about our focal point course in January at the DEI section for the AAC and U. All right, couple final things. This is the diversibility activities that are occurring on campus, both for employees, staff, and students. You can see here the new ERG. We would welcome you there. We also have down here in the left-hand corner, disability, equity, diversity, and inclusion. This was our best practices for teaching disabled learners in the faculty learning community. And we still have our D2L website, which is a treasure trove of best practices if you're interested. And we have a new student group that is part of our community, which I am the faculty sponsor for, Accessible Futures. You may see them. And they actually worked with DUXA on November 5th to have accessibility and inclusive design. These were experts from the outside that came in to talk about how we can make the digital space much more accessible for the disabled learner. And finally, our students are holding us accountable. This came yesterday onto social media by our DePaul Accessibility Futures new student group. Our students are encouraging us to make our courses accessible and encouraging those comments in our teaching and course evals. So they're holding us accountable for this accessibility, which I think is wonderful. They are at the forefront of moving us into a much more inclusive world with DEI on all of the topics, including disability. All right, I want to end there. If anybody, questions?
I just want to thank you, Kelly, for such an important topic that I think we don't usually get a chance to really learn more about and to have an open conversation about. And it's really critical for us as faculty to really understand it more to help our students. And I think it's critical. And thank you so much for, having a topic like this, Doug, introduced in our seminar today.
Thank you, Jumana.
I also wanted to ask, I have a lot of help sessions with the faculty. I can't remember. I always get confused between the technology assistants and the one that trains faculty. What's that one called?
DOTS?
No. It's you can call and make appointments, and they can help you with D2L and.
Alex could answer that.
Yeah.
It's faculty
I
instructional
want to say
technology.
FTE, but that's sorry, instructional technology. Yeah. So it's instructional technology, and so I've often gone to them and said, "Can you help me with this feature or that feature. Are they trained to help with the features you've talked about?
Alex?
So we support technologies that are specifically I say we, it's another unit in my department. They support technologies that are specifically instructional technologies. So they would be able to help you with the accessibility features within D2L and Panopto. So like captioning in Panopto, that kind of thing. They're not, they just like don't get into like general productivity software as a category. So things like Microsoft Office, Adobe Creative Suite, things like that. So the accessibility.
I wouldn't be able to look at the because it was really instructional for me to find, like, I didn't know about that accessibility button and what it does because I haven't had to use it. And there are also things that you mentioned, and I was writing down keywords that I really don't know what you're saying, and so I need to educate myself. And I was hoping that maybe instructional technology could do that, but I'll just Google.
And Heidi, you can contact me.
I would love that.
Any other questions or comments on this presentation? Clement.
I do, yeah. Thanks a lot, Kelly. I don't put documents on my D2L. I don't know where I got this, but I think some time ago, the legal department or so, copyright issues. So don't put your PDF there. So the library will link it. So my D2L, they have direct access to the library. I was wondering, could the library do this instead of faculty?
Well, I believe, okay, so I do the same thing. I use RAs, of course. Yeah. And I believe there is some accessibility checking on most of what the library has already. So the new things don't have the problem. The problem is I'm doing nuclear waste. So they're reading the Supreme Court case in my focal point on low-level nuclear waste. And they're reading the US Department of Energy that I came out of the national labs. They're reading the original documents. And so and of course the GAO office, when you start getting, Clement, these older documents, older meaning the 90s, okay, in the early 2000s, that's what you have to check. And actually, I missed like 4 of them. And my student this term, and I'm ready for next term, said to me, I can't read these. They will tell you, but so now I know, and it took me seconds to minutes to change the Supreme Court case and the GAO documents. And okay, so usually the library with RAs, it is accessible because they're newer documents, and I do use them. But if you have something older, which I do, because of the historical nature of nuclear waste in my focal point, I have to check on those and convert those, okay? It doesn't take long, and it's free. We have Adobe as our software for all faculty.
And I see Josh put in the chat, some of the library's online offerings will read journal articles and book chapters out loud to you. So that's good to know too. Well, we are at 2:00. Thank you everybody for coming to this. We really appreciate that you think enough of the students to make the classes as good as you can and to